States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you guys. So just a little bit of housekeeping real quick. If you could remember to silence your phones. I've already heard a couple go off tonight. And then after Representative Gabbard talks, we are going to have a little bit of a conversation and a Q&A session, but we do have press and we are live streaming this, so if you could wait until somebody comes to you with a microphone and speak directly into the microphone, that way everybody can hear your question and appreciate it, and they're not left in the dark. That would be really appreciated. But I'm going to introduce the wonderful owner of this establishment, one of the owners, Neil.
Welcome. Well, that's great. Boy, welcome to Main Street Bookends. This is really, really wonderful. Catherine and I opened up the bookstore 21 years ago, and during that time, we've had, I think, most of the presidential candidates come through here, starting in 2000. And people recognize that the road to the White House comes through Main Street Bookends, Warner. So you're on a good path. You're on a good path. You're on a path in the right place. And so this is not only a destination for candidates, but also it's in a community that has made the commitment to put together a strong, vibrant local economy with an active Main Street, and we've worked very hard on that. 3 years ago, we've converted all the town buildings and properties to 100% solar. So that's and we're working to expand to create the infrastructure so that the power that's produced here in Warner can actually be used here in Warner. And so that's the next step, and we continue to work on that. We have a wonderful network of organic farmers that continue to support a strong local economy. And as most of you probably know, we do have a very vibrant Main Street. And the bookstore actually went 100% solar 9 years ago. And we're the second bookstore in the country to go 100% solar. And the bookstore that beat us was out in Tucson, and they beat us by 3 months. But we don't think that really counts, because Tucson, the sun is always shining. So we're the first east of Tucson. And we have turned the land around the bookstore over to nonprofit Main Street Warner. And the nonprofit, schedules and puts together programming throughout the 3 seasons, a wonderful stage. And with a lot of volunteer help, we're able to provide a venue for music, events, theater, other programs. And all of the events are free to all. So we have a free public park here surrounding this bookstore. So, and I think that represents a lot of the commitments and values, certainly, that Tulsi has been focused on for a number of years. So we're very pleased to be able to have Tulsi here to speak to the issues. And as we said coming in, it's an opportune moment given what's happening in respect to Iran and other things. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Neil and Catherine. Where is she? There you are in the back. Thank you so much for opening up Bookends to us and having this wonderful community gathering space to be able to have conversations like the one that we'll have here tonight. Where's Cameron? Cameron, this is your 3rd event, I hear. Thank you very much for being here, and thanks for your support and engagement. How old are you, if I may ask? You're awesome. Thank you very much, Cameron. Thanks to all of you. Thank you for making the time to come here tonight. It's been quite a day. For those of you who maybe saw the news break last night, or maybe it was the headline that you woke up to, we are in a state of war with Iran. It's the significance of the action that Trump took last night, violating the Constitution, taking military action, taking out a top military commander of another country without any kind of congressional authorization or declaration of war, seriously escalating this tit-for-tat conflict that's been going on for quite some time, both directly and indirectly. This puts our country at risk. It puts our troops at risk, those who are serving in Iraq and Syria. More troops are now being deployed. I think a lot of people I've heard from who voted for Trump back in 2016 did so because of the rhetoric that they heard about how Trump would end stupid wars. But the reality of where we are today is that that hasn't happened. In fact, we are walking as a nation straight into a war with Iran that would be far more devastating and costly than anything that we've seen in the war in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria. It would make these wars look like a picnic. Since May of 2019 alone, we've deployed more than 15,000 additional troops to the Middle East. So contrary to ending stupid wars and bringing troops home, we've seen more and more of our men and women in uniform being deployed. The serious implications of this escalation, I think, can't be overstated. And I think it's important to recognize that we didn't just wake up one day and find ourselves in this situation. People are saying, well, what about what happened at the embassy? How are you supposed to respond to a protest at one of our embassies? Well, you've got to look back farther to see, how did we get here? What are the actions that led to this point? When we talk for this back and forth, this tit-for-tat conflict that is continuing and will continue into an endless quagmire, began with President Trump going in and withdrawing the United States from the Iran nuclear weapons agreement. An agreement that both our country, the IAEA, other countries, signatories were saying that Iran was in compliance with. That agreement had flaws. I was very critical as the agreement was going through the process of negotiations and the attempts to try to make it stronger, with the objective and the goal of being preventing Iran from building or acquiring a nuclear weapon. But when it came down to that vote, I voted for that agreement because I understood very clearly that even with its flaws, the choice was really about diplomacy versus war. And I chose diplomacy because I know in a very deeply personal way what the cost of war is. Now, by President Trump withdrawing us from that nuclear weapons agreement, every single day that goes by that we and Iran is no longer in compliance with that agreement, we are one day closer to Iran continuing to build those nuclear weapons capabilities. That was the first step that was taken to escalate this situation. Deployed more troops to the region, designated Iran's military in an unprecedented fashion as a terrorist organization, exacted and implemented escalating sanctions, this modern-day siege tactics in order to try to choke out Iran's economy. All of these things, laying down sticks of dynamite one after the other, leading us to where we are today, pushing us closer and closer into this state of war with Iran. This is something that is difficult to measure in what it could end up costing us. Us in American lives, the lives of people, not only in Iran, but across the Middle East, and what it will cost us in American taxpayer dollars. You know, for those of you who've heard me speak before or have listened to anything that I've said throughout this presidential campaign, you know that I focus a lot on foreign policy. And sometimes people ask me why. Why? That's just one issue of many issues that we are concerned with in our country. Well, the most important responsibility the president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. And those decisions that our commander-in-chief makes has a direct implication on our national security, our safety, obviously the safety and well-being of our men and women in uniform. It has an impact on every single one of us. When we look at what is currently being spent in Afghanistan alone, just in Afghanistan, we see $4 billion of our taxpayer dollars going out the door. $4 billion a month going just to Afghanistan. We're not talking about Iraq or Syria or anywhere else. $4 billion. That's $5.5 million per hour. Just start to think about, especially as we go into different local towns and communities and hear about the need for more paraprofessionals in our schools. Our kids need assistance with mental health. Teachers need trauma training. We see the drastic need for resources going towards recovery centers for those struggling with this opioid epidemic, dollars that should be going towards preserving our environment and our open spaces. We see so many different needs of our resources in our communities here at home, and yet that's not where our dollars are going. The number one thing that we need to do, as Trump has escalated this situation, is pushing us into war with Iran, is get our troops out of Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and bring them home. Because so long as they are there, we will see potentially another outcome like Vietnam. At some point, they will come home. It's really just a question of when and at what cost. How many more lives will we be willing to sacrifice? How much more of our taxpayer dollars? And to achieve what end? What's the goal here? That's the question I have. What's the goal? What's the end point that we want to achieve? And as we've seen in so many of these wars, these regime change wars, nation building, no one can really answer that question. And if you don't know what quote unquote winning looks like, then how do you achieve it? We owe our men and women in uniform much more than what they're getting. We need to bring our troops home. So we look at the impacts and the implications of these decisions that are being made. They're serious and they're far-reaching. And yet again, another war is being launched without any involvement from Congress, which the Constitution mandates. I have served in Congress now for going on a little over 7 years now, and have served on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee. I still serve on the Homeland Security Committee. And just this past year, as on the Armed Services Committee, we were putting together the annual National Defense Authorization Act, the big defense bill that passes every year. We worked hard in that committee and successfully included a provision that specifically said no military action will be taken against Iran without express authorization from Congress. That was in the final draft of the bill that was passed out of the House of Representatives. Went through the Senate, went through conference committee. When it came back before the House, that provision was taken out. And in many different occasions, when I and other of my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, have questioned leaders in this administration about whether they would come to Congress to seek authorization before taking military action against Iran, the answer has been no. They believe they have the authority to do so. A blatant abuse of, a blatant undermining of our Constitution. I introduced legislation in the previous Congress and in this Congress called the No More Presidential Wars Resolution, highlighting this change that must be made because over not just this administration, I mean, there have been previous administrations as well that have overstepped their authorities and basically taken that authority away from Congress. And frankly, Congress has not done its job in standing up for and demanding that Congress be the body that decides whether or not to declare war. My resolution is one that I'm pushing once again for Congress to pass as we see yet another example of this overstepping of authorities, really ignoring what our Constitution has laid out, the roles that the executive branch and Congress need to and should be playing. I want to open it up here. I want to hear what's on your mind. I know it's a depressing topic to start with, but the implications are serious. I believe that this is a moment that in the future we will look back to as a serious turning point that could be the beginning of yet another endless quagmire in the Middle East that will prove to be incredibly costly to all of us. For me, at a very deeply personal level, this further affirms why I'm running for president. I understand how serious this responsibility is to serve as commander-in-chief. And whereas president, I will end these long-standing regime change war policies, end this nation-building missions that often follow, work to de-escalate tensions between the United States and other nuclear-armed countries so that we can end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race, and instead make sure that we are redirecting our taxpayer dollars towards actually serving the needs of people in our communities here at home, all across this country, and those needs are great, and they are pressing. It is long past time that we make sure that we are honoring our men and women in uniform by only sending them on missions that are really, truly worthy of their great sacrifice, and that we are focusing our efforts, our government is focusing its efforts on actually serving the needs of the American people right here at home. Again, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight, and I would love to open it up to questions and thoughts and really start the conversation. This is something that I really value and appreciate throughout the campaign, is being able to be here with all of you and to be able to hear from you. Yes, sir, we'll start with you.
Good, thank you. Very much glad to hear that
If you could.
very happy to hear that you're committed to some sort of diplomacy. You're committed to some sort of diplomacy. How would you start the process of eliminating existential threat, as Chomsky calls it, of nuclear warfare? We've now gotten out of the treaties that did limit nuclear weapons, or the number of them and so forth. And it is, I think the time is over when a select few who got there first can have them and no one else can. The only answer is that they all have to go. And it's more of a threat than it was before this administration.
That's right.
Okay, well, I'd like to know
What was
how
your
you-
name, sir?
Nick.
Nick,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you. This is the central question and challenge that we have before us. It doesn't get much attention. It's not often talked about. But as you said, the risk that is posed to all of us because of this existential threat of nuclear catastrophe is great. And you know, if you're listening and reading what a lot of the nuclear strategists across the country and around the world are putting out, is they are ringing the alarm bells for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. This is something that I personally, and I think we in Hawaii and people across the country had a wake-up call to in 2018 when we had a alert that went out where we thought early on a Saturday morning that that was going to be the end. that this message went out across our televisions, radios, cell phones. Civil defense sent this whole message out saying there is incoming missile, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. And for us, for people in Hawaii, I actually wasn't there. My family was there. I was in DC at the time. But when this message went out, really, when you think about what would go through your head if we got that message here this evening, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. And knowing that you have about 15 minutes. 15 minutes. And that was where, you know, we had college kids that were sprinting across their campus trying to find shelter and finding none. Families driving fast down the highway trying to find shelter and seeing that there was none. A father, he lowered his little girl down a manhole thinking that may be a place to keep her safe, but realizing there's no shelter. And so it was a big wake-up call to, while that turned out to be a false alarm, we reacted in the way that we did because this threat is very real. And it exposed the reality of how our leaders have failed us, both in getting us to this point where we face this great risk of nuclear catastrophe, and also that there is no shelter. You've got a fancy alert system that tells us what to do and where to go seek shelter, but leaving all of us kind of shrugging our shoulders. Raise your hands if you have a place to go here that would allow you to not only survive the nuclear blast, but the fallout and the nuclear winter that comes after that. There is no shelter. And so this is a serious priority that I think begins, sir, with diplomacy, that begins with recognizing how these various treaties have been eroded or completely torn up and thrown in the trash. Early in 2021, we're seeing the expiration of the New START treaty with no actions by this administration to start to try to negotiate the renewal of that treaty, and therefore further fueling a nuclear arms race that's costing us as taxpayers more money and making us in the world less safe. So it begins with diplomacy. It begins with restarting these conversations necessary to both begin to start to put these treaties back together or strengthen them, but also rebuild the relationships necessary to make the kinds of progress that we saw leaders like President Kennedy make and President Reagan, who, when they began, negotiations with the INF Treaty, Reagan was vastly criticized and said this is going to be an impossible thing to do, but he did it. He did it because he and Gorbachev both understood why this was so important. Same with Kennedy and Khrushchev. Understood why this is so important. So what I would do as president, one of the first things is actually call a summit with some of these other nuclear armed countries like Russia and China to begin to have these necessary talks focused on nuclear non-proliferation, to begin this conversation with leaders around the world that will help us move forward towards that future where none of us and no one in the world has to live in fear of an imminent nuclear catastrophe, which would destroy this planet. I've been in hearings in the Armed Services Committee in Congress with different experts coming from different places who are, talking about these smaller tactical nuclear weapons and saying why they're so necessary and really pushing this whole idea of a nuclear arms race. Well, if they are getting it, then we've got to get it and we've got to stay ahead of the game, but not really understanding and realizing that there is no winning this. There's no winning this race. And that you, by making these smaller nuclear weapons, you're increasing the likelihood of a nuclear war, of which there is no winner. We all lose. The world loses. Everything will be destroyed. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm David Carrick. I'm a New Hampshire state representative.
Thank you, David.
And you gave a very good summation of the current international situation. My question is there any recourse the U.S. House of Representatives can take to stop this war with Iran? Or is it just a fait accompli on the part of the president?
No, there is certainly action that Congress could take to, I mean, there's a few different things, and honestly, my staff is looking into this now, but one idea that's been put forward is to invoke the War Powers Resolution. Another is to pass legislation that would freeze funding for the Pentagon in certain areas until Congress gets some answers, but to try to stop this from continuing to escalate. It will require a sense of urgency in congressional leaders to understand that this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue about our Constitution, and it's an issue about our national security and our future. So we're looking into what some of the different legislative options will be. To be very honest with you, I just don't know. I don't know how serious the leadership in Congress is about taking that best course of action to stop this progression of this escalation of war. That's honestly that's where we the people come in. You know, I've been looking at different tweets and different statements that have been put out, and you know, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. Some people just saying, well, you know, maybe what he did wasn't so bad, but he should have come to Congress first, and other people saying that what he did was an act of war and should not have happened at all. But yes, Congress should have been consulted, and the situation is quickly evolving. And I think in order for our leaders in our government to understand what we feel about, we the people feel about it, and the necessity to take action from stopping this from continuing, I think is absolutely necessary. So if there was ever any time to make phone calls and send emails and post on Twitter and Facebook using every platform possible, now is that time. I think we've got someone in the back there who I can't see. Is there somebody there? Hi.
My name's Christy Duff. I'm actually from Iowa. I'm the Unity for Jay spokesperson, and I co-host the Free Assange Vigil. In spite of the fact that Julian Assange is being held as a political prisoner in the UK, he's held 23 hours in solitary confinement. He's slowly dying. WikiLeaks continues to publish the truth. Specifically, I would like to hear your thoughts on that we've had the 4th OPCW release and the implications of that for our foreign policy.
What is the OPC?
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
The OPCW.
I can. It's the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, an organization within the United Nations that specifically has the mission of going and inspecting and seeing what's happening with chemical weapons and chemical weapons attacks in different parts of the world. And what was your name again? Sorry, Christy. So what Christy's referring to is there were two cases of a chemical weapons attack within Syria that the UN confirmed that their investigators said was a chemical weapons attack, and that our government and the Trump administration took military action, once again without congressional authorization, supposedly on the basis of this report. But what Christie's referring to is that I think there's 4 now. There have been 4 reports leaked by whistleblowers within this organization who were the investigators, saying that the information that they gathered was washed and kept out of that final report that the OPCW put out, meaning that final report not only did not reflect the truth of what they found on the ground, it actually reflected the opposite of what they found on the ground. And so I think what this highlights to me more than anything else is it's such a stark reminder of what we remember about Iraq, when we were told that there are these reports, there's weapons of mass destruction. This is the reason why we need to go in and overthrow Saddam Hussein and go to war and all of these things. And the rest of the story, we all know exactly what happened. But this is the situation, and another reminder of how careful we must be before taking military action to actually make sure that you have the evidence to consider that it is true before you decide what course of action should be taken. This is something that I'm very interested now with the situation in Iran, that the administration is citing plans and intelligence and other things, but have been very, holding their cards close to their chest about exactly what that is. I'm looking forward to, I hope, a congressional briefing of some sort where at least Congress can be brought into these intelligence briefings that they are citing.
Who are the other peace leaders in the Congress? You have some strong ones, like take his from California, and there are others. I think you could probably outmaneuver right now and act very quickly and get something and then bring it to court.
We are working and trying to do exactly that. We're working and trying to do exactly that. So much of this, and on a much larger scale, this is one of the challenges that exists within this. The rules in Congress now is that ultimately it's just a couple of people who make those decisions about whether or not to bring something to the floor. So we're trying to look at what are the different avenues that we can pursue that can mandate some sort of action by Congress, both to get the facts and to get the information, and for Congress to exercise its constitutional role and authority, whether people want to or not. Yes, sir.
I really think that everybody that's in a leadership position and making decisions should study history.
Yes.
And it scares me to think that
And read some books, maybe, huh?
very
Neil?
few people have really read about what happened in the past.
Yeah.
The Soviets were in Afghanistan, the British Empire in the 1800s. You can go back just about as far back as you want to the founding of all these countries. You know, most of the Middle Eastern countries were shared by Britain and France and so on. I have the feeling that a lot of people don't know any of this stuff.
I think you're right.
And they are making decisions that impact everybody.
Yeah.
And you can't have diplomacy if you don't understand the viewpoints of the people in those countries. So everybody in Congress should be reading these things, and certainly the people in the White House should be.
Yes.
And they should listen to those people who know what is going on. They're diplomats and so on, instead of ignoring them and making them some sort of political fodder, which is what's happening. That really bothers me. So,
Yeah. Thank you. I agree with you. This really is important. You know, it's people say, well, how do you know? You know, how can you try to see what's going to happen next? It's not that hard because we look to the past. We look.
If you don't know the past, you're going to be bamboozled by the future.
Yes, bamboozled by the future. I like that.
Just made it up. You can use that.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Yeah, look, I think there's two really big issues here. One is the one you're pointing out, that you've got a lot of people in positions of great responsibility, both in the executive and in Congress, to make decisions, but who, even with good intentions, are not making the right decisions because they don't know history, or they don't know really what's happening. They don't really understand the issues.
I don't care about history.
Well, that's the second thing, is they don't care. Or, look, John Bolton, Twitter today, celebrating the action that this administration took. He's been trying to go to war with Iran and overthrow the Iranian government for decades. Same with Secretary Mike Pompeo. So Trump has surrounded himself with these neocons whose agenda has actually been very transparent. It's not that they don't know or understand history. They've just got their own agenda that ultimately benefits Saudi Arabia, the military-industrial complex, the foreign policy establishment in Washington that crosses both political parties over time, that's been very entrenched in pursuing exactly this outcome.
Politics trumps history.
Yes. I should be taking notes right now. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Mary Lou Hoyt.
Marion?
I'm a resident of New London, New Hampshire, part-time. I have I'm going to shift gears
Yeah,
just
sure.
slightly, having to do with the diplomacy and the brave men and women that serve as diplomats all over the world. And our U.S. Embassy was surrounded and was under siege. How would you have handled that differently? Or we've seen in the immediate past, disastrous results. And those two are brave men and women.
Completely agree.
I'd like to
Public
know your
servants who are
views on-
there representing and serving our country. I think the first thing is just going back to kind of how important it is to have prevented these types of situations from occurring in the first place. You know, these protests didn't just come out of a rosy field one day and just decide, okay, we're going to go storm the embassy. The actions that this administration has taken has inflamed these tensions, leading to this point. They were there because of the military strikes the administration had taken the night before. So that, I think, is the most important thing, is how do we prevent these types of things from happening in the first place, and understanding there are consequences to the policies and the decisions that we are making that really very often actually end up undermining our own interests. If there is those situations, and on the Foreign Affairs Committee, we've looked at making sure that our embassies are secure and that they have the resources necessary to be able to protect those who are serving there, and if there is a situation of crisis, getting them out. But again, I point back to the root cause, because I think it's a really important point. When we look back at what happened in Benghazi, in Libya, we look back at what happened that ultimately created all of this chaos and terrorism strongholds and everything else, is we and other countries went in and toppled Gaddafi in Libya, created a completely failed state that resulted in not only the chaos that we saw throughout that period of time, but that is continuing to this day, where you have children and women being sold as slaves in open markets in broad daylight. So I didn't catch your name.
I didn't say it.
What is your name?
Dale.
Dale. As Dale was saying, this is where it's important, as we look to these different things that cause great concern and put us or, our troops or diplomats or our interests at risk. We have to know and be able to have the foresight that, okay, if we make decision to do course of action A, that there will be a consequence, and being able to look at history and say, okay, what can we expect will come from this? What will the cost be? And how will we respond? How will the other actors and how will the other people in the region or in that nation respond? And being able to actually think through before we make these decisions, rather than looking back in the rearview mirror and saying, gosh, well, if we had only known, or if we had only thought of, or if we had only asked the right questions in the beginning, then perhaps we could have prevented a terrible loss of life, both of Americans as well as for the people across the region.
Was there communication with our allies in the area? We usually work collaboratively, diplomatically.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We don't, to my
don't know
knowledge, we don't know that for sure yet, one way or the other. I know someone didn't. There hasn't been a lot of information flowing from the executive to Congress about the what led to this whole series of military actions within Iraq. What we do know is really what we've seen play out, which is our relationship with the Iraqi government has been incredibly damaged. Even the relationship with the Iraqi people has been very damaged in this process, and it's creating a whole new, just within Iraq itself, a whole new serious level of threats, both for the people who live there and Americans who are stationed there and who are serving there. We're seeing warning messages going out from the State Department now saying, if you're there, leave, canceling flights, telling people not to go, and so on and so forth.
I'm going to, first of all, aloha.
Aloha.
We met last March, but the situation now is a lot more serious than it was back then. And I'd like to ask you about two things that we do know. First, concerning the current nuclear posture review. Yeah. We know that it openly promotes preparing for, fighting, and winning nuclear war. Now, I take it, based on what you've said consistently all along, that you would reject that.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the Union of Concerned Scientists back from the Brink Resolution?
Yes.
Are you in favor of it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was easy. I mean, the Union of Concerned Scientists and some other organizations, there's one called a Nuclear Wake Up Call as well that we've been working with, who've been involved for decades around these issues, who I think are doing such necessary work to be able to push these issues to the forefront. One of those steps has to do with, for example, the no first use policy and legislation that we're pushing forward, trying to push forward in Congress to bring about that change and others, as we are unfortunately getting deeper and deeper into this nuclear arms race. It's taken us to a very, very dangerous place. Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna go try to get some other people. Yes, Cameron.
Protecting the environment has always been important to me, and I want to know what you would do to protect the environment when you're president.
Thank you. This is something that's been important to me since I was about your age, growing up in Hawaii, and just like you, it's a beautiful place, and the outdoors is our playground, and not having to be taught in school or by anybody that, well, hey, you should do this because it's important, but just knowing, like, we go and have fun on the beach every weekend at home. We should make sure that it's like clean, both for us and for everybody else. And that for me then translated to wanting to protect clean water. There was, when I was around your age, there was a landfill that was looking to be built over one of our largest water aquifers in Hawaii. And even then I understood why that was a pretty dangerous and stupid thing to do. That for us, especially in an island community, once you poison a water aquifer, you're not getting that back. And there's no way to fill trucks up with clean water to bring in. Everything we get is either shipped or flown in. So, at that point, started organizing with my friends. We had petitions. We're getting people to sign them. And what we saw was that the state senator who was kind of greasing the wheels for his developer friend to build this landfill, the protests from the community were heard loud and clear, and we prevented that from happening. And so I got to appreciate the power of the voices of the people early on, and that sparked within me a desire to do more and to do more and to do more, and why I ran for the state house when I was 21. But really, this has been an issue of great importance to me from then through till now. Change to protect our environment needs to happen at every level of our government, as well as by every single one of us. The laundry list of things that we can and should do to accomplish this is great. And so I won't go through all of that, but I think I usually just break it down to the basics that we have to keep at the forefront, that we all need clean water to survive. No living thing can survive without clean water. Clean air. Making sure that we maintain and preserve soil quality so we can grow food for our communities, for people. Something that's often taken for granted. Protecting our, open spaces, animals. We had somebody who came to a town hall last night who was talking about the issue with the moose and the dwindling moose population here and what threat that is posing really to the community. There are various threats like this that are happening all across our country, and it's up to us to make sure that we are taking action, whether we're talking about development, we're talking about oil pipelines, or the Clean Water Act and the different steps this administration has taken to erode these protections that are in place for a reason in the EPA, transitioning off of fossil fuels and really investing in a clean, renewable energy future. And once again, going back to foreign policy, building relationships with other countries to be able to build a global coalition to address this global threat of climate change that we're facing. all of these actions beginning in our own homes and in our own everyday lives, all the way up to being able to build relationships with other countries based on cooperation rather than conflict, so that we can exercise diplomacy to work out our differences, but also maintain this opportunity to collaborate and work together on areas of shared and common concern, is what is necessary for us all to make sure that we are preserving both our neighborhoods and our communities, but this planet that we call home and that we want to be able to leave behind for your grandkids one day, Cameron. Yes.
So I'm wondering about the political machine that you've been involved in so far in the House and how you see a president able to really make change, given that the powers that be are so large, so frightening, and they have their will of their own. And we're not talking about the ones we vote in, you know. And how do you see yourself? I mean, I think of you as a warrior, and I'm happy about that and excited about that. But how can even one warrior stand up against this?
No single person, no individual, I don't care who you are, where you are, can do this alone. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm inviting all of you to join me. Because this movement, and it really is a movement, it's about a movement of, by, and for the people, to make sure that our government is of, by, and for the people. And you're right, the obstacles are great. The forces of the powerful elite who are in power and who have benefited from maintaining the status quo for so long are fighting like hell to make sure that their power base is not undermined by the interests of the people that have been left behind for so long. And so, yes, this starts with engaging in our democracy. If you can vote, great. Cameron's here, he can't even vote yet, but he's being a part of the change, right? And raising the bar for our elected leaders, so we're actually holding our leaders accountable. It starts with passing anti-corruption legislation to be able to root out the corruption within our own government that allows this powerful elite, this small group of people, to be able to maintain their stranglehold on that power, and allows for the greed to continue to benefit and profit. By closing the revolving door that we have in Washington, both with elected officials and senior staffers and bureaucrats within our government, we can begin to root out this corruption that has allowed them to exploit the well-being of the people for their own benefit and gain. What? Leadership. Whether you're talking about our intelligence agencies, Department of Defense, Department of State, FDA, SEC, if you look across our government, really what it comes down to is making sure that we have leaders whose sole purpose and mission is to serve the people of our country. And the President of the United States is the one who sets that tone, that culture of leadership, and making sure that those who are selected to serve as cabinet members at the highest levels, but also those who are working within various levels within our government, are there to fulfill that singular purpose and mission. And if not, there are accountability measures in place to deal with that. It's a big question, it's a big issue. It's not one that's tackled easily or simply or quickly, but it's what must be done if we as a country are to fulfill the vision that our founders had for us, truly, of making sure we have a government of, by, and for the people.
We have time for one last question.
You're ready.
Why is it me? No, I apologize. Hi, Tulsi. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for persisting in this very challenging race for change.
Thank you.
I think everybody here recognizes that change is needed.
Yes.
And we appreciate your efforts in that regard. I'm Pete. I'm one of Catherine and Neil's favorite customers. Aren't I, Catherine?
All right.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
waving in the back.
Yeah. So I agree with the history,
Yeah.
that we need to revisit history. I also agree with the idea that we need to withdraw our troops. What I struggle with, and it goes back to history, is that same area and region that we're looking to withdraw from, for centuries, continues to be unstable. and it will persist in being unstable. So in a withdrawal of troops, how is that ultimately going to change the world, not just protect our troops, but change all the instability that persists in that region, and really, I think, is a big problem that we continue to encounter time and time again. Yeah. So if you could just address that.
Yeah,
that
thank
a
you.
bit.
What's your name, sir?
I'm Pete.
Pete. This is a really great question because it gets to, it's actually a question that really isn't asked often enough. Will our presence continuing in these countries in the Middle East actually help stabilize things, or will it make the situation worse? And as Dale said, when we look throughout history, we can see how time and time again, our interventions and regime change wars and long-term or indefinite occupations have so often actually made the problem worse, not better, for the people who are living in these countries as well as for our interests. And so I think that it's about accepting, in some cases, the reality of many of these countries across the Middle East who have been living in turmoil and instability for so long. And, you have sectarian wars and conflicts between Shia and Sunni across the Middle East. You have the tribal conflicts ongoing within Afghanistan. That these are not issues that we can or should try to resolve, that these are complex, long-standing conflicts that ultimately it is only these countries across the Middle East will have to work their way through, as messy and painful and hard as that is. And so that's really, in bringing our troops home, it's answering that question, is what is in the interests of our national security, what's in the interests of the American people, make sure that we are protecting and furthering those interests. But also it's making sure we ask that question. If there's a situation we're saying, hey, can we come in and help? Is our help or our assistance actually going to accomplish that, or will it have the opposite effect of making the problem worse? I think it's important that we look at, as we engage with other countries, that we don't immediately conclude that the only way that we can engage with another country or assist them is through military action or military presence. By looking outside of the two options of bombing countries or escalating sanctions, we can see many other tools that maybe we can help empower or provide assistance or provide some form of help or aid, again, if it's a situation where we can actually provide some help. The third point to that, kind of linked to national security, especially in the Middle East, I think it's important that we recognize the threat that is still posed by terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. And the more effective and strategic way to be able to defeat those threats is, as they may be popping up in different places, to deploy. We've got extremely well-trained special forces teams who can go in quickly, eliminate that threat, and get out, rather than saying, well, we have to have thousands and thousands of troops stationed in all these countries across the Middle East in order to prevent a resurgence of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. So it's about really being smart and strategic about how and when and where we need to deploy our military forces, but also re-looking at how we can build partnerships and engage with other countries in a way that actually allows us to be a force for good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This time went by very quickly. I thank you all so much again for choosing to spend some of your time here with us this evening. I want to invite one of our volunteers here, Dave, to come up and just share a few words with you about what we are doing in our campaign here in New Hampshire as we head very quickly towards Election Day.
Thank you so much. So I am actually from Brooklyn, New York, not here from New Hampshire, although I love being back up here. I'm originally from upstate, so this kind of feels like home. And I got involved with the campaign about 3.5 months ago, just taking a bi-weekly trip up here every other weekend just to kind of help build signs and stuff like that. And then about 2 months ago, I actually moved here. I packed a suitcase, went on one of those weekend trips, and I never went back. And it was shortly after I actually got to meet Tulsi in person, and I got to meet the wonderful staff that we have here in New Hampshire, people like Vince, people like Nietzsche, just incredible volunteer base that we have here. And so I'm up here to tell you guys how you can get involved. It's easier for you. You don't have to move because you already live in New Hampshire. So we're going to be passing out these pledge cards. They say, Tulsi can count on me. And on the front, it's just a little bit of information so we can contact you. And on the back, it has all of the ways that you might be able to help. Or not all, but some. Some are as simple as just telling some friends. Just saying, hey, Tulsi's awesome. I got to hear her last night, and I want you to hear her too. Just share the live stream that we have here tonight. Abe is a wonderful videographer, and everything's caught on camera. You can host a house party. We've had quite a few of them here in New Hampshire, and we're going to be doing more in the next couple of weeks. Just show up on election day. That's one of the choices. Hopefully everyone in this room was already planning on doing that. And then you can also show up and help volunteer. Come here to events, help us run the sign-in table, help us build signs, help us put up signs. I'm sure you've all seen some of our yard signs throughout the state. We have had an amazing team out there putting those up. So if you would like to fill one of these out, we have 2 volunteers here that are going to be handing them out. Just raise your hand and somebody will come by with a pledge card and a pen right now. And then just return them either to me or Janet in the back. And then after Tulsi talks a little bit more, usually, we're going to be doing a photo line. So we're going to start on this side and come through and exit that way. And while you're in that photo line, I'll come through with a clipboard. If you guys want a yard sign in your house, we will come put one up, and I'll get your information for that.
Thank you so much, Dave. Good job. You know, one of the many things that I have really gotten to appreciate in, I think it's been almost a year now since we started campaigning here. Don't roll your eyes. I know time's gone by fast. I'm thinking that way too, and I can't believe that as we were sitting here, was it January 3rd, and Election Day is February 11th already. But the thing that I've really appreciated and continue to appreciate every day is that as we're traveling across your state, that you think for yourself. That as there's so much political noise swirling around us, that you take seriously the responsibility that you have as voters, first in the nation, in not only making the decisions for yourself about who you would like to serve as commander-in-chief, but the message that you will send to the country. And so I'm grateful that you've taken the time to come and to listen tonight, to share tonight, and that you think about what we've talked about, and especially in light of the news that we are dealing with today, how consequential the decision is that you have before you. So what I will ask of you is that if you are leaving here tonight and you've decided to join us and to join our campaign, to be able to share this message with those around you, coworkers, friends, neighbors, family, please do fill out one of those pledge cards and start to think about 5 people in your life that you can have this conversation with. You can have an incredible impact as we approach Election Day here. And if you're leaving tonight still undecided, you're still thinking things through and you want to look at different issues, I encourage you also just to start talking, to start sharing a little bit about what you experienced or heard here tonight with others, so that together, we can make sure that voters are making the best informed decision possible. Once again, thank you, Catherine and Neil, for having us here tonight. You've got a wonderful, wonderful place here. And thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Aloha. Thank you.
loving. Love is the answer, at least for most of the questions in my heart. Why are we here and where do we go and how come it's so hard? It's not always easy or sometimes life will be deceiving. I tell you the thing is so much better when we're together. So much better when we're together. Look at them stars when we're together. Well, it's so much better when we're together. Yeah, it's so much better when we're together. All of these moments just might find a way to my dreams. But I know that they'll be gone. The morning light